Okay, ready to go. So we are continuing our journey through the PhD application itself today. And we are particularly focusing today on the role of diversity in the PhD admissions process and related statements that you might be asked for or not asked for in any particular application. So following up on our focus the last time on the statement of purpose, which you might find either kind of in a traditional form in terms of something that includes your personal motivation or your research statement, or you might find those things requested separately. And I tried to emphasize that this is a really important thing. The time that you spend on this is very much time well spent, just in terms of the role that it plays in the admissions process, compared to how long it takes you to establish your research experience or your academic track record. Compared to those things, the time that you spend on your statements, that is unusually impactful time, I would say, in terms of getting into graduate school. And we, I highlighted that, programs want to hear about multiple things. They want to hear about your motivation to become this type of biologist. They want to hear about your research experience, both in terms of your big picture understanding of the questions that motivate it and why it's important, but also in terms of the details of what you did. And it's important to convey your passion throughout the statement for research and for this area of science. We talked about, the importance of expressing your interest both in this area of science, but also for this program that you're applying to. Why is that appealing to you, and which specific faculty might you be interested in working with? So that's where we got last time. Today, we're going to be talking about diversity, and I'll lead with a little bit of motivation in terms of why is this a meaningful factor in PhD admissions processes. And then we'll talk about the sort of text that might be requested and what it should include. And so in terms of motivating this topic, so why is this important at all to PhD programs? Well, there is a big problem in terms of scientists, across the board, very often looking a lot like me and not reflecting the broader population. And so in this country, the rates of earning PhDs, when you account for the demographics of this country, vary quite a bit from one group to the next. And so for a different reason, for my work co-chairing a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee for Wisconsin Evolution, I actually did an analysis using some data from the NSF that covered a 5-year span. And I looked at basically the population corrected rates of earning a PhD in evolution and also in genetics, given that that's my home department. And so I'm here giving you kind of relative numbers compared to the rates of earning PhDs for Caucasians in the US. So the take home is that, so these are normalized such that, for US whites, these numbers would be 1. And so the obvious pattern for these 3 groups, for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans, you could see why these groups are considered underrepresented in science. This is not great. So these numbers get as bad as like, 20-fold less likely on a per individual basis to earn a PhD in this discipline. So, this is just to, to kind of make things obvious. I don't know if you find these numbers upsetting. I kind of hope so. So, this is a major motivating factor for why, scientists want to, make things better, to have a more, diverse field. So why is this the case? Why are there such vast inequities? Well, I can't even really, do more than scratch the surface. These come from big, complicated social problems that exist in this country and beyond. There are still, vast gaps in average wealth between different groups in the U.S. And it's become increasingly difficult for people to, to really transcend educationally the background that they're born into economically. So, like college has become vastly more expensive than it was a couple of generations ago. That doesn't make things any easier. And, in terms of recruiting individuals from underrepresented groups into science, one barrier is just the lack of other people who look like them or come from a similar cultural background, especially in terms of their role models. So people in positions like mine, but also, in terms of their peers. There's kind of a cohort dynamic that can exist or not exist. And that can encourage or not encourage people to go into a given field. And I have to admit, there are also problems with the way that science has interfaced with many groups historically. So I'm keenly aware of this, being someone who studies evolution and genetics. And so that's really the interface where, this whole kind of pseudoscience of eugenics sprouted up and led to a great deal of harm. These weren't just ideas, but these, even in this country, eugenics led to social policies, laws that were very discriminatory between groups. And so, to some extent, these legacies may contribute to persisting attitudes toward science or specific areas of science among different communities. And I have to acknowledge that, in terms of studying life science, there are great inequities in terms of, the access that people have to the sort of experiences that might really motivate pursuing a career in biology, especially in terms of like, safe access to the outdoors. So again, a very partial list of explanations for the unfortunate pattern that I highlighted a few moments ago in terms of the vast differences in rates of earning PhDs between groups. So one thing that I have noticed since I've been at UW, and so like in the last decade or so, I've been, heartened to really note a pretty rapid rise of interest and urgency among my colleagues in trying to remedy the lack of diversity in our fields. And so that doesn't necessarily lead to any instant fixes, but, so for example, when I started here, like no department had a DEI committee, that was unheard of. Now they pretty much all do. And so, okay, making a committee doesn't instantly solve any problems, but at least, it means there are people talking about what we should be doing and actually starting to do some things. And it has led to some changes in terms of graduate admissions as well. And so one example is that, like when I started here, basically every program required the GRE. Some of them also required a subject GRE. And so, among other issues, these tests cost money, and they're easier for some people and on average some groups to afford than others. And for that matter, depending on your background, you may have the ability to pay for some nice test preparation courses that can really help to boost your score potentially. Does that mean that you're likely to be a better scientist? Probably not, but it means that you'll have nicer numbers on the page. And so, that was another change that was made, I would say largely with, a desire to improve the consideration of diverse applicants in graduate admissions. So, we've started to see some changes. And so, these are driven, in large part by, people just feeling like, well, when is this ever going to change? And what is it going to take? But I do also want to point out that graduate programs also have more pragmatic reasons to want to increase diversity in their programs, beyond their own convictions. And so there's been, research indicating that diverse teams perform better in various contexts. Science is often idea limited, and so having a wider variety of ideas in play might be a very good thing. And another practical consideration for programs is sometimes their funding. And so like the NIH funds some graduate programs directly through training grants. And it's very important to the funding agency in this case that the program is training a diverse group of students. Now, I do have to acknowledge that the ways in which diversity is prioritized in this sort of governmental, funding agency, is somewhat specific. For one thing, they're really restricted in their interest to domestic students, and they focus on certain things that are easy to categorize, like race and ethnicity, and they're also interested in disability status, whereas they might be less interested, for example, in other aspects of diversity that I might think are important. But anyway, this is at least motivating some consideration of diversity. And another factor is that programs realize that there may often be specific additional funding available for students from underrepresented U.S. groups, whether that's kind of funding from the university or maybe from agencies like the NIH and NSF that have programs that are trying to remedy the vast gaps in representation that I pointed to. So there are practical reasons in addition to more ideological reasons to try to increase diversity in graduate training. And so, for any or all of those reasons, admissions committees might consider diversity in various capacities. So, for example, that could include racial and ethnic background in light of the disparities that I highlighted and the experiences that individuals have had related to that background in this country, for example. It could include aspects of gender and orientation, especially to the degree that they've been that they've kind of motivated this individual to pursue science, or fueled their determination in some way. Another aspect of diversity that can be relevant to consider is economic background, and so it's very striking to me when I look through PhD applications that, like, UW asked a question about whether the applicant is a first-generation college student. It's a pretty small fraction who mark yes, I have to say. And so, that gets back to some of the issues of, like educational mobility in this country, from generation to generation. And it also, has to do with, I guess, barriers that individuals have overcome. And so I'll come back to that point a little bit later. And it could also be relevant to consider cultural background in terms of the distinct perspectives and ways of thinking and ideas that might fuel. And so I would certainly, include, more international dimensions of diversity in what I think about, as an admissions committee member. So, there are some very relevant changes on tap this year. And so, in spite of the sort of disparities that I highlighted earlier on, so, like up to 20-fold differences in the rates at which different groups are obtaining PhDs in the sciences, it is now illegal to consider race per se in admissions, including graduate admissions. This is as a consequence of the recent Supreme Court decision that you may have heard about. And so, for example, at UW, people looking at graduate applications and admissions will not see individuals' responses to the standard question about race and ethnicity. The university will have that information to use for record-keeping purposes, to track the efficacy of their efforts to, solicit applications from diverse populations, but it cannot be seen during the admissions process directly. So certainly applicants may otherwise say things that suggests something about their racial or ethnic background, but that cannot be considered on its own in admissions, regardless of the degree of underrepresentation or any goals related to diversity itself. And yet, programs across the board are still going to be placing a high priority on diversity, but this limits to some extent how diversity can be considered. And so the important thing now is that any given aspect of diversity has to be considered in terms of individual attributes and potential to contribute to this university, to this program. So, just to emphasize that point, this is, a passage from the majority opinion in the Supreme Court case, highlighting that, this does not prohibit universities from considering how race has affected one's individual experiences, and anything related to that in terms of how it's shaped their character or inspired them in a particular direction, is all very much, still open to consideration. And so it's not as if, all consideration of diversity is out the window here, far from it. And I should acknowledge also that this, is not a consensus opinion by any means, and that, there are obviously some contentious issues even in terms of the composition of the current U.S. Supreme Court, and specific political events that have led to that. But this is just to highlight that even within the court, there were voices strongly in opposition to this decision as well, and in part pointing to the ongoing disparities that have been passed down through generations, and questioning whether we should prohibit universities from considering that some have been more advantaged basically than others due to these factors, and including even government-mediated discrimination. So this is where we're at, though. This decision is, binding law at this point. So one thing that I think this really increases the importance of for many programs is to make sure that they are soliciting from applicants the information that they need in order to consider diversity in a very individualized framework. And so, one way that this might manifest is through some programs requesting specific diversity-oriented statements. These statements were already becoming more common even before the Supreme Court decision. But in light of the factors that I just mentioned, I think they will be becoming more and more common through time. And so, as was pointed out last time during our question and answer section, sometimes, the statements are sometimes arranged in different ways. Sometimes, you might have a separate personal statement and research statement. Sometimes these two things might be together, and then they ask for kind of a separate, diversity-oriented statement. Sometimes they might not ask for any diversity-oriented content. So I'll try to highlight some different ways in which these statements seem to be manifesting. And so this is with a little help from students in the class here, and also from me looking around a bit. So I had previously highlighted this example from the program that I work with. And so, our program has kind of a traditional integrated statement of purpose with both personal motivation and the research side of things. But in our supplemental application, our program has decided to add on a short statement that is more diversity focused. So what do you see as your potential role and or contribution to create a more diverse, accepting, and stimulating community, campus, and society? So this is one example of a prompt, and I'll kind of come back to later, like how people sometimes respond to this prompt and what information might be worth including. A similar example was pointed out from the University of Colorado, Denver. They also had kind of a separate diversity statement, and they want you to illustrate your perspective on diversity and inclusion and how you've overcome challenges presented in your journey, and to talk about how you'd contribute to cultivating a diverse and inclusive community, and and how you would advance the program's commitment to these goals. So you probably hear some similar sort of themes between these two prompts. But other programs may structure their requests differently. So for example, I looked up University of Michigan, and they have the separate personal statement and research statement. And they seem to kind of, in the personal statement, they seem to be including, I think, some it's kind of subtle, but I think, they are kind of trying to elicit some diversity relevant response here in asking, how have your background and life experiences, including cultural, geographical, financial, and educational, or other opportunities or challenges, motivated your decision to pursue a graduate degree at the University of Michigan? So here we're kind of taking the personal motivation and integrating that with the diversity side of things, but separating it from the research statement. And so you might find others like that. Cornell, I would say, kind of similar. So their personal statement, so it's a little bit longer in their case. Their personal statement is up to 1,000 words, and that's separate from the research statement. And so this is kind of long, but there are questions here about like barriers you faced, or else understanding the barriers that others face. And so that mirrors some of the things that I'll suggest down the line in this lecture today. And there is a specific prompt here about service or leadership efforts related to diversity, inclusion, access, and equity. And so that's clearly meant to be included in this statement, which is also I think more broadly about personal motivation. What they label as academic statement of purpose, I think is probably really more of a research statement. And this is also can be fairly long. So, it's a little challenging. Like, one place might demand that like everything from you be under 1,000 words. Here you have, up to 1,000 words for this statement and up to 1,200 for this one. And so, it's up to you how much to differentiate things in terms of length. But this is, the statement that where they want to hear both about your past research and your ongoing interests, including with regard to the program in question. So this was specifically from their more molecular programs website. And so there are other examples yet. Duke had a single statement that they asked for, and there really isn't a very specific diversity-oriented prompt here compared to some of the things that we've just read, but it's all in one. So whatever you feel is relevant to put in there, you can put in there. Likewise, University of Washington, I found that they were requesting a single, what they called holistic statement. I don't remember which specific program this was, but I guess biology, basically. So they have very detailed suggestions about what to put in. And in general, I think, like the suggestions from one place are probably useful for another place. They're not really generally looking for such different things, I would say. And so it could be worth, reading through these sorts of things in detail. And I think it's a good thing when they do spell out what they're looking for in detail. I think that's kind of an equalizing factor, to take weight off from the question of how good was the advice you got. Not everyone's had a class like this. So yeah, so that's another example where they put everything together. What else we got? Oh, I'm going to embarrass Penn State. So I looked at the website for their biology department, and they state that their application uses 5 essay prompts in lieu of a personal statement. But to actually get to those essay prompts, as far as I could tell, you'd have to actually register and start the application itself, which I think is actually a little bit ridiculous. So shame on you, Penn State, in that case, unless I've misunderstood, but I couldn't find those prompts on their website. So yeah, they earned the double face palm here. Yeah. So yeah, usually I don't make a whole lot of jokes in this class, but and yeah, but it's kind of up to you. Like I used a sci-fi graphic here, but like it's up to you whether this represents comedy or horror, basically. So from an applicant's point of view, maybe it's more on the horror side. To try to figure out like what all these different programs are looking for. Anyway, there's always a weird one in the group. And some programs might ask for other information entirely. So for example, one student in the class pointed out that a program at Michigan State had a specific prompt about the impacts of COVID individually, and also a prompt about the teaching experience that applicants have acquired thus far. More broadly, though, the elements that I've tended to focus on here that seem to be frequently requested from programs. It seems like every program wants to hear something about personal motivation and your past research and forward-looking interests. And many programs are now making specific requests about more diversity-focused themes, either integrated with one or both of the other categories or not. And so, for example, we've looked at cases where you might prepare one statement that has all of these things. We've looked at cases where you might prepare one statement that has the diversity and motivation parts together and research separate. And we've looked at cases where there might be a motivation and research statement and a separate diversity-oriented statement. So that's just to point out that, it's likely that you will have to sort of, reconfigure the different sections of what you write for different applications. But, for the most part, like if you have text on these topics, hopefully it won't be an enormous amount of work for you to reconfigure, which parts are in which document for a particular application. You're already going to have to tailor at least the research part, from one program to the next in terms of why you're interested in that program and which faculty there. And so, yeah, I realize this does make life even a little bit harder, when you've got everything else going on at the same time. But yeah, it does take some time to really, do the whole PhD application thing right. So what should you be trying to convey in statements like this? So what are programs looking for to the extent that they're asking for diversity-oriented content? Well, I think that, the specific prompts that I put up, if you look through them in more detail, they are pretty illuminating. But, specific suggestions that I could think of, include like, how have you overcome adversity in your life, and how have you shown resilience and determination in doing so? Why? Well, a couple of reasons. One is that it's widely recognized that research can be a frustrating process, that there are failures along the way. And so there really is a great deal of interest in selecting for, students who really possess these very qualities, who are resilient in the face of challenges and determined to succeed, even when things are not going well. And so to the extent that you can illustrate that you are such a person, that is to your advantage. And, the other point that I would make about adversity, and which I tend to say to our admissions committee members, is that, if you have two applicants, let's say in terms of just purely their readiness to succeed, in this program, their level of preparation for this program, let's say today, maybe they're both like right here. But, if in the same amount of time, like, okay, let's say that they're at the same point in their life. If one of them, got here by coming from here, and the other one got here by coming from here, they had to overcome a lot more. Who are you going to bet on to go farther in the future? I'm going to bet on the one who's overcome more to get to this point. And so, there's that argument, and there's also the argument about, bringing unique perspectives based on one's life experiences. So, that's why it can really be important to try to convey actually like what you've overcome, and to convey, how you've shown these kind of qualities. And relatedly, how have your own unique life experiences both, motivated what you're proposing to do in your scientific career? How have they inspired you to, to take the lead on whatever initiatives, whether it's in science or otherwise? And how have your experiences given you unique perspectives and unique ways of thinking that might, contribute toward the sort of diversity benefits that I outlined early on today. So this is one kind of line of thinking that you might wish to consider as you're trying to convey, diversity relevant information, either in a specific diversity prompt or in a broader statement of personal motivation. I guess, that's easier for some people than others. Some people have had to overcome more than others. And, if that doesn't really sound like you, like if you don't feel like there's a lot that you can say personally about, what you've, overcome in life or coming from a particularly unique background in some way, there are still ways to write, a fairly compelling diversity statement. One is just to emphasize that you get it, that you want to help, even as if you are someone who does not come from a particularly disadvantaged or underrepresented background, that you see the importance in these issues and want to help make things better. That matters. And along those lines, anything that you can point to that you have either done yourself, doesn't have to be in science. It could be, some sort of outreach or volunteering thing, or just something you feel committed to help address in the future, to help to help the field of science that you're going into, the scientific community that you're a part of, or more broadly, society, to make progress in these areas. And so, that can all be worth talking about. So that's actually all I have for today. We are potentially finishing quite early. We've been going about 40 minutes here. For one thing, we have lots of time for questions if you have any. But I do want to take a few moments to talk about the statement and the peer feedback. I am a little bit concerned right now because I checked just before class and I only had 25 statements turned in. You absolutely need to have turned in your statement by now. So if not, I don't know, you tell me how I'm supposed to assign peer reviewers if not all the statements are in, and how the peer reviewers are supposed to get their feedback done on 2 different statements if those statements aren't all done yet. So absolutely get them in now if you haven't. In fact, I actually set up Canvas, in advance to assign peer reviewers automatically. Actually about now, it may have done so already, or maybe it's about to. I think I set it to do so during this class. And so, this is all kind of new for me. I've never even used the peer reviewer function in Canvas before. And so I don't know how I might have to tweak things, in response to late assignments or otherwise. But this is it, this is the number one thing you have to do for this class. And so, getting that in and also getting the peer feedback done on time. And along those lines, like I mentioned here that the peer feedback is due before the next class, that is a big deal too. Get it done on time. I mean it. There are even students in this class who have deadlines, in November. And so, I've told them that, even starting a week from Monday, so everyone should have their peer feedback by next Friday. If you're in a hurry to get feedback from me after doing your revisions, well, you could do your revisions over the weekend. And starting Monday, I will check to see who has turned in their revised statement for my feedback. And, it's good for me too if I can get an early start. So you don't have to get your revisions into me until, 2 weeks from today. But if you choose to get them in earlier, then you're likely to get feedback from me earlier. And so that may save me from having to, do more statements like, during the week of Thanksgiving. And it means you'd get my feedback, in time to have more time to make use of it, for your applications, if you're doing applications this year. So, and I emphasize too that the feedback is a graded item. There's a decent number of points assigned to that item actually. And so, I'm looking for, more than just like a couple of trivial wording suggestions or something. I want to see meaningful suggestions that could actually help improve your peer's statement. And I also mentioned a couple of specific instructions here in terms of how to do this. So turning in the statement, you are required to do that by submitting a link through Canvas to your Google document that contains your draft statement of purpose. And I also emphasized that you need to have set the permissions in your Google document file such that anyone from UW-Madison has commenter access. That will guarantee that as long as they're signed in to their UW G Suite account, that they can actually post comments in your file. The other thing, though, that I want to emphasize is don't delete those comments until I have had a chance to evaluate the feedback itself. So I'll let you know when it's okay to delete comments that others have made in your document, but don't do it before then. All right, so that is all I've got, and I welcome any questions about either the assignments here or anything we've talked about today. Yes. That's okay. Yes, but yeah, just keep in mind you might need to sign into your G Suite account in order to make comments to others' statements. But if you made it so everyone can access it, then everyone can access it as long as they have commenter access, not just viewer access. There should be a button where you can request access, and then that would be specific to your account, but at least it would get you there. But yeah, it would really be easier if people followed the instructions about access to begin with, because otherwise both peer reviewers and me will have to be asking them for access. Yes. Right. Yeah, there are definitely lines to be walked here, various lines. One that I alluded to last time is like, how personal do you want to get? And that's partly an individual statement. And I think that's kind of related to your question too. So, I think in terms of talking about the challenges you faced, I think it's good to do that in the context of how you've overcome them and, how that's made you stronger, and, whatever traits that you feel like that has engendered in you. It may, to the extent that you're not able to do that, like in a particular context, maybe it's not worth mentioning actually. If it can't, lead into that sort of narrative, maybe it's not. So, not every detail is going to be worth mentioning. I think it's worth not coming across as bitter Even if you have had to overcome a lot, it just doesn't tend to play that well. Um, so to the extent that it's motivated you to do good things, great. Um, but I think you probably have a pretty clear idea of, like what is a positive framing, of such experiences, and what is less so. Um, yeah. I can only think of one diversity statement that I've read that really kind of, it was not from someone in one of the groups that I highlighted at the beginning of this talk, that came across kind of whiny and kind of, I don't know, complained in a victim sort of way, and in ways that actually seemed a bit entitled. Um, but that's very rare. It's actually, I would say, in my experience, it's rare that anyone makes a negative impression to me in their diversity statement. Very rare. I guess the only other case that I can think of is when someone actually submitted an application last year, and for their diversity statement, that was 3 words: go back later. Oops. Yep. They forgot to go back later. So yeah, it's worth checking things over, right? They didn't get interviewed, obviously. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm glad to gift you a little extra time for statement related activities, because this is kind of our big push in this class, this last week and the next couple. And so I look forward to seeing what you've written and how you're helping each other. So I will be making those. I'll be, confirming that the peer review assignments, and trying to make sure those are as complete as possible in light of the issues that I mentioned. So again, make sure your statement is submitted. Submit the link now, even if it's not done, frankly. Um, again, you still get to change this, but I need to be able to mechanically make these review assignments today. So let's make sure that can happen. Yes. They're going to stay just in the document. Yes. I'm going to look at your comments in the document that they are in. Right. No separate Canvas submission. Uh-huh. You're asking if a statement is like way more than 2,000 words? Are you finding that to be the case? Okay. I think it's reasonable for your first comment to be that many programs may not allow you to have a statement this long. I think I realize that, there's a feeling that this is asking more of you. I feel like, it's still important to read through it and to make multiple substantive comments. But maybe you can't thoroughly comment on every paragraph of it. That's what I would say. All right, well, thanks, everyone. I will see you next time.